In the summer of 2025, military experts everywhere speculated that in its war with Ukraine, Russia would soon be able to launch 1,000 or more long-range drones at its enemy every night. Major General Christian Freuding, head of the German Ministry of Defense's Planning and Command Staff, Major Robert Brovdy, commander of the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces, and the Institute for the Study of War all speculated that Russia could reach this quantity by November. But the threat never materialized. Instead, the opposite happened. It wasn't Russia that dramatically increased the number of nightly long-range strikes, but Ukraine, and a reckoning may be on the way for embattled Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine's large-scale attack on Moscow and 13 other regions on May 16th and 17th was one of its largest and most consequential on the Russian capital. For many Russians, it's brought the war home in an unprecedented way. For the regime, it's prompted a frantic scramble to try and interdict what comes next, the threat of even larger attacks, and much more often. Here's how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's long-range sanctions on Moscow have caused a lot of commotion, and how that's likely to shape what comes next. It must give Freuding and Brovdy satisfaction to know that their predictions that swarms of 1,000 Russian drones would be terrorizing Ukraine nightly within months proved to be greatly exaggerated. Russia has only arguably achieved that number once. On the nights of May 14th and 15th, it fired more than 1,560 drones at Ukraine, with the bulk of the attack occurring overnight on May 14th. The number of nightly attack drones has indeed been increasing since January, but nowhere near the 1,000 per night mark. An average of 143 was launched in that month, followed by an average of 180 in February, 197 in March, and 240 in April. The daily average looks like it will fall to around 185 during May, with Russia seemingly now stockpiling drones for less regular mass attacks, rather than going whole hog every night. But that's a far cry from the original predictions, especially since on the flip side, Ukrainian long-range strikes have been increasing by leaps and bounds. And it's now not the Ukrainians who are fretting about the prospects of regular 1,000 drone attacks, but the Russians. That number might still be a way off, but it's indisputable that the gap between the numbers of Ukrainian drones being launched at Russia and vice versa is shrinking rapidly. During 2025, Ukrainian long-range strikes increased five-fold. By March, they'd not just matched the average number of daily Russian strikes, but topped them, averaging at over 230 per day. Now, the number of drones being fired is important. Even if they're shot down, they consume valuable and limited air defense missiles. Like Ukraine, Russia claims to shoot down more than 90% of incoming drones. But unlike Ukraine, Russia is still primarily using air defense missiles to shoot down Ukraine's long-range strike drones. And as we'll see a bit later, they don't grow on trees. But more important than the number of downed drones is the range of targets that they're able to hit, and the number that gets through and strikes their target successfully. On both of these counts, Ukraine's strike effectiveness is also rising impressively. In particular, Ukrainian drones are now regularly causing damage in Moscow. Now, it's far from uncommon on this planet for a nation's wealth and power to be concentrated in and around its capital, but Moscow and Russia are a special case. As Russian-born, US-based author and analyst Elvira Baghi explains in a recent essay, Moscow is literally the political and emotional heart of Russia. For years, border regions have lived much closer to the war. Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, and others have heard explosions, seen fires, dealt with evacuations, and watched the front move psychologically closer. For people there, the war was never fully abstract, she writes. But in Russia, the regions have no say in how the country is run, she continues. All power concentrates in Moscow. In such a system, the suffering of the periphery is treated as background noise. But when drones reach Moscow's airspace, the emotional balance changes, because Moscow was supposed to be the safe room. As Ukraine's large-scale attack on Moscow earlier in the month ably demonstrates, that safe room is no longer safe, and that changes everything for Muscovites, Russians in other regions, and the leadership. For slam-dunk proof that Ukraine's strikes on Moscow have changed the status quo in Russia fundamentally, look no further than this week's announcement from the Russian Interregional Public Organization of Pilots and Aircraft Owners, AOPA for short. According to this announcement, in just a few days at the beginning of June, all flights of civil aircraft at altitudes below 16,732 feet will be completely prohibited in the Moscow Air Zone, or FIR. The no-fly zone also extends to the state border with Belarus, the St. Petersburg FIR to the west, the St. Petersburg FIR to the north, the Ekaterinburg FIR to the northeast, the Samara FIR to the east and southeast, and to the temporary regime established in the south of the Russian Federation. It's an outcome very few Russians would have thought possible even a year ago. The airspace above Moscow in the heart of Russia closed to lower flying traffic indefinitely. Now, besides when taking off and landing, the altitude specified means that passenger jets should still be able to cross the no-fly zone skies safely. Civilian passenger jets typically cruise at altitudes between 30 and 42,000 feet due to the increased fuel efficiency, avoidance of bad weather, and extra safety buffer that this altitude allows. But the no-fly zone isn't meant to restrict these planes. Exceptions to the no-fly rule are in fact provided for regular and charter passenger flights operating to and from airports. The restrictions will also not apply to medical evacuation, sanitary aviation, aviation chemical works, infrastructure monitoring, and flights under government contracts. So the measures are clearly aimed at clearing the skies so that Russian air defenses are better able to take down Ukrainian drones. Ukrainian drones typically fly below that 16,700-foot mark. Most Ukrainian long-range strike drones, such as the Firepoint FP1, RS-1 BARS, and modified UJ-22 Airborne, operate between 1,600 and 9,800 feet, well below the cutoff altitude. Flying at these lower altitudes allows drones to evade radar and avoid high-altitude air defense systems like the S-400 and S-300. That forces Russia to lean more heavily on short-range systems like the Pantsir and Tor, as well as visual detection, which are significantly less effective against drone swarms. That's a huge problem for Russia, because its layered air defense system has been significantly degraded, and the more often Ukraine strikes, the more degraded it becomes. Of course, the problem of degraded air defenses isn't unique to Russia. One of the most critical learnings of the war in Ukraine is that traditional air defense systems like the US's Patriot system, the German IRIS-T, and indeed the Russian S-300 and 400, are not feasible as anti-drone systems. These are expensive systems with missiles costing hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to produce. The missiles also take a long time to produce. It's just not feasible to spend those kinds of amounts and deplete your arsenals shooting down drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce and can be churned out at a rate of hundreds per month. The US and Israel's war in Iran has thrown this conundrum into stark relief. The Patriot system has proven to be effective against Russian missile attacks. In fact, the system is a critical component of Ukraine's anti-air missile air defenses. Before Operation Epic Fury, Ukraine was already struggling to secure the quantities of PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles it needed to adequately stock its Patriots. Today, it's scrambling for whatever scraps it can get. Earlier in May, Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat stated, "Today the launchers assigned to certain units and batteries are half empty, and that's putting it mildly. We have found ourselves on short rations when it comes to missiles due to certain supply problems." He added that Ukraine has had to ask allies for as few as 5 to 10 missiles at a time for systems such as NASAMS and IRIS-T. Considering that Russia launched more than 700 missiles at Ukraine in 2025, you can see how acute the problem has become. But the Russians have the same problem, although it's not as acute, at least not yet. That's because to date, Russia has had to fend off a lot fewer long-range missiles than Ukraine. That's certain to change as Ukraine ramps up production of its Neptune, Flamingo, and other new missiles. But in this respect, Russia has had it relatively easy and been able to fire S-300 and S-400 missiles at Ukrainian drones if it so desired as a result. However, at anywhere from $300,000 to $4 million each, it's as unsustainable in the long run to fire them at much cheaper incoming drones as it is for Ukraine, the US, or anyone else. Ukraine has adapted to the problem by developing a wide range of anti-drone systems domestically and acting as an incubator for a myriad of systems being developed in partner countries like the US, Germany, the UK, and Sweden. Barely a week goes by without some new mobile fire system, interceptor drone system, directed energy system, or other innovation being unveiled. Russia has been slower off the mark with these alternate systems, and it's paying dearly for it now as Ukraine's attacks ramp up. Its air defenses may still be bringing down the majority of Ukrainian drones, but the constantly increasing numbers of drones it must contend with mean ever greater degradation of its defenses, and ever more drones getting through and destroying critical infrastructure. Enjoying this deep dive into the latest news from Ukraine? Well, that's what we do here at The Military Show. Daily updates and analysis of all the most important military and geopolitical stories. Subscribe to the channel if you want to know not just what happened, but why it matters. Ukrainian analysts Oboz and Information Resistance ran the rule over Russia's air defenses and identified 4 main reasons why Ukraine is increasingly able to penetrate Moscow's air defenses successfully. First, they point to the fact that there simply isn't enough of it in place, and that's despite having some of the most comprehensive air defenses on the planet. As of spring 2026, Moscow is protected by 2 dense rings of air defense systems, in addition to several positions within the city and various engagement zones in the wider Moscow region. That's 4 layers of air defense. According to OSINT analysts, around 130 air defense positions are deployed in and around the capital in total. The backbone of the internal ring consists of around 100 Pantsir S-1 air defense systems and a small number of Tor systems, in place specifically to intercept Ukrainian drones and cruise missiles. They're bolstered by around 25 S-400 batteries, used to intercept cruise and ballistic missiles. Like Ukraine, Russia also uses its air force to shoot down drones. Ukraine uses the guns and missiles on its F-16s and Mirage 2000 fighter jets and Mi-8-17 and Mi-24-35 helicopters. Russia does the same with its Su-35, Su-30SM and MiG-31 fighter jets and Ka-52 and Mi-28 helicopters. It's also recently started mass-producing AI-enabled Yolka hand-fired interceptor drones and new supposedly high-tech anti-drone systems like the Zak-30 Citadel, Zuba and Titan. And yet despite all of that, something like 10% of Ukrainian drones fired on May 16th to 17th still got through. As Ukrainian news outlet Obozrevatal observes, even though 4 rings of echeloned air defense were formed around Moscow and the density of countermeasures was the highest in Russia, they were not enough to intercept all targets. As it turned out, there were enough gaps and vulnerabilities in the defense to break through the created rings. The reason for that is likely in part due to the second factor identified by the Ukrainian OSINT teams. They're running out of ammunition. In late April, the head of the Ukrainian military, Alexander Syrskyi, noted, "Systematic strikes on Russian production facilities further degrade the enemy's air defense capabilities, which are already experiencing a shortage of missiles to counter Ukrainian unmanned systems and strike assets." As noted earlier, the primary system Russia uses for inner-city defense is the Pantsir. But in February, Ukraine announced that it had destroyed half of Russia's key Pantsir systems, and Russian military bloggers seem to bear those losses out. Earlier in April, one of Russia's most prominent military blogger organizations, Rybar, wrote, "Simply fabricating tens of thousands of Pantsir missiles out of thin air is physically impossible," clearly implying a shortage. The channel added the Russian anti-aircraft missile forces were being stretched to the limit and expending ammunition at an accelerated rate. Rybar suggested that Russia adopt a counter-drone strategy like Ukraine's, including an emphasis on mobile fire groups and intercept drone crews. The introduction of the Yolka and other systems suggests that at least some elements of the Russian military-industrial complex see it the same way. But is it going to be a case of too little, too late? The third factor identified is what Obozrevatel calls technological backwardness. They say that some Russian air defense systems have problems with fire control systems, guidance, radars, fixation, tracking, and destruction of targets, particularly the Pantsir. They write that the Pantsir copes extremely poorly with the tasks assigned to it due to multiple technological problems that cannot be fully solved due to sanctions. They are trying to partially fix them by placing this most common and basic means of combating drones in a small radius, on towers and roofs of buildings, but the improvement in efficiency from such measures is insignificant. Now, a separate analysis conducted by the Ukrainian military site Militarny contradicts the second part of that statement to an extent. In a recent analysis of Moscow's air defenses in the aftermath of Ukraine's major strike, they report that the Pantsirs are installed in 2 main types of air defense positions: earth embankments with concrete access pads and metal towers where systems are lifted into position by crane. Raising these systems above ground level increases the radar horizon and improves detection and engagement of low-altitude small targets, they say. Whether this has in fact improved their effectiveness is difficult to ascertain with any certainty at this point. Rybar also disputes that the Pantsir is ineffective. In June last year, they wrote, "Before the SMO, Special Military Operation, they were criticized by everyone, but after improvements based on combat experience, the system has become extremely effective and perhaps the most successful Russian air defense system, even shooting down ATACMS." They point to a new missile configuration for the Pantsir that carries 48 mini-missiles specifically for anti-drone swarm operations, as evidence of improved efficiency, as well as the introduction of the Pantsir SMD-E variant. This is reportedly a mini version of the system that uses similar small missiles for protecting stationary objects. While these developments don't sound like technological backwardness, how these new and still rare systems actually perform in reality is still an open question. One thing is for sure, Ukraine is certainly systematically degrading the number of air defense systems that Russia has at its disposal, which they say is the fourth factor cited by Obozrevatel. Currently, the Russian occupation forces are losing dozens of air defense units every month, while they can only produce units. Compensation for losses is critically lagging behind the level of losses themselves, and every month Russia's air defense assets are becoming fewer and fewer, Rybar writes. Data from the Ukrainian armed forces backs them up. According to an analysis of official Ukrainian stats by OSINT analyst Kyle Glenn, between January and the end of March, Ukraine hit 85 units of air defense equipment, including surface-to-air missile systems and radar systems. That's almost 3 times the attrition rate recorded during 2025. Glenn notes that the increase is about 240% compared with the previous 3 months. According to him, this fact almost certainly explains the increased effectiveness of Ukrainian long-range strikes in 2026. Meanwhile, the Kiel Institute estimated that as of early 2025, Russia produced 4 medium and long-range air defense systems and 14 short-range air defense systems per month. Russia increased production of the S-400 components that year, but it's clear that Russia's high-end air defenses are being destroyed at a larger rate than they can be produced. Put it all together and you can see exactly why, in practical terms, the Russians are starting to panic about the prospects of 1,000 Ukrainian drones terrorizing Moscow daily. But there's a psychological aspect as well, and it's arguably going to be more devastating in the long run. Baghi argues that strikes on Moscow have shattered Russian confidence in Putin's ability to protect them. Moscow is filled with people who feed the war, she explains. They may not oppose the war, but they can panic and demand explanations. They can ask why air defense failed, why airports were disrupted, why the state did not warn them, and why officials said everything was under control when everyone saw the videos. For an authoritarian system, that matters more than the suffering of ordinary people far away. The Kremlin cannot ignore anxiety near its own machinery, Baghi writes. Baghi also says the strikes have smashed the illusion created by the Russian propaganda machine that Russia is winning. While the war stayed far away, this worked, she writes. But drone attacks on Moscow create a brutal contradiction. If Russia is winning, why is Moscow being attacked? If Ukraine is a failed state, how does it reach the capital region of a nuclear power? If the army is advancing every day, why are oil facilities, airfields, factories and airports inside Russia becoming targets? Ukrainian drones hitting Moscow is not just a military embarrassment, she argues. It attacks the myth at its foundation. It makes ordinary Russians question what they're being told, the authorities, and, most importantly, the previously unassailable position and image of Putin himself. Now, as Baghi points out, in the long run, strikes on Moscow that destroy the illusion of safety may ultimately lead to the toppling of Putin's regime, which might force Russia to play an even deadlier hand. It's basic psychology. Scared people want more protection, and the more scared they are, the more irrational what they perceive as protection often becomes. For now, as Baghi notes, in Russia, the impact of Ukraine's worsening strikes on the beating heart of the country isn't leading for calls for negotiations to end the war. Quite the opposite. The mood in Moscow, and indeed around the country, seems to have hardened significantly, both among the population and the elites, and the risk is growing that this could all escalate into a nuclear confrontation. Hardliners like the influential insider Professor Sergei Karaganov have long been calling for Russia to restore its deterrence by dropping a few tactical nuclear weapons on Ukraine. Whether that would invite a full-blown nuclear war with NATO or indeed restore some form of deterrence is debatable. What's not debatable is that as of late, he's been calling for strikes on European countries involved in drone production for Ukraine. First, he says they should be struck with conventional weapons. If that doesn't bring them to their senses, they should then be nuked. Now, Karaganov isn't just any old academic. He's been advising Soviet and Russian presidents since the 1980s and is one of the most powerful people in the country outside of Putin's inner circle. He fell out of Putin's inner circle precisely because of his more hardline approach compared to Putin. 2 years ago, most Russian elites backed Putin's more gradual approach. Now he claims his views hold a clear majority. Judging from Russian media and social media, as Baghi predicts, the population is in a similar mood. The calls are for hitting them harder and teaching them a lesson, not capitulation, and Putin seems to have responded in kind. In the aftermath of last week's Ukrainian attack on Starobelsk in the Russian-occupied Luhansk Oblast, which the Russians say deliberately hit a college dormitory, killing 21 students and injuring dozens more, Russia lashed out with arguably the heaviest strike on Kyiv and other regions since the onset of the war. Reportedly, almost every region of the city was hit. The Russian Foreign Ministry has warned the Starobelsk attack had exhausted Russia's patience and that the Kyiv strike was just the beginning of a new round of much heavier strikes. It advised foreign embassy staff to evacuate the city and residents to avoid administrative and military facilities. In response, Zelensky remains defiant, promising even more long-range sanctions. It remains to be seen whether the Russians are bluffing, whether they have the conventional power to seriously degrade Ukraine, or whether Putin, or whoever follows him if he's ousted, is willing to push the big red button. But it certainly seems as if the grinding, attritional nature of the war over the past few years might be rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous. We will of course be following developments closely and keeping you updated, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. In the meantime, just in case we are in fact facing a full-on nuclear war, check out this video about the best places in the US to wait it out. And thanks for watching.